Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Juma Mubarak. As promised, I'm continuing with this video series on the rights of women in Islam. What I'd like to address in this video is the status of women in pre-Islamic societies globally, not just in pre-Islamic Arabia. Again, this information is only what I know, and through my personal studies. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts the intention, which is to bring him honor and glory first and foremost, and to inshallah help us understand the rights of women in Islam better. I'd like to start off at 586 AD in France. The church held a conference which was to decide whether or not women had souls. Now, what becomes an important thing to understand is the power that the church has in early Europe, because Christianity, as it was put together at the Council of Nicaea, was built to be a state religion. It is a political driving force, and throughout European history, the Crusades and for a very long time after that, the church played a very pivotal role in the political makeup of the West. So the church was the rulers of the rulers and the kings of the kings, a sort of thing. The Pope had unprecedented power. So what happened in France at 586 AD is at this conference, what they were trying to decide was whether the souls of women, if they had souls, was a human soul, a subhuman soul, or an animal soul. What they came up with in the end was that women did have souls, but the souls were inferior to that of men. So, and the reason being was that women are on this earth to service the desires of men, basically helpers, if you will, a subservient human being to men. We move along to other parts of Europe where you have, even earlier than that, you have Plato, the philosopher, that says that the coward, the evil, and the corrupt spirit of man is what makes women. In essence, what he's saying is these three undesirable things are what women are made up of. Even his fellow philosopher Socrates, he says that the evil, not he says that the existence of women is the main source of crisis and destruction in the world. That the woman is like a poisonous plant. That it's beautiful to look at, but once the birds eat of its fruit, they die immediately. So it's into this sort of thought process that the woman had a subservient soul. Whether or not the woman even had a soul was something that was up for debate. That the women are made up of undesirable aspects of man's life, and that women are like poisonous trees, that Islam enters into the West. Judaism and Christianity, they blame the fall of man from paradise on the woman, because the snake seduces Eve, Eve eats the fruit, Eve then goes on to seduce Adam, Adam eats the fruit. And this all comes into play in Genesis 3:12, where the verse reads, he said, he in this case being Adam, and he's speaking with God. The verse reads, he said, the woman that you have brought unto me has given me the fruit, and I have eaten. Different translations, but this generally the crux of the whole verse. So in essence, what he's saying here is that if it was not for the woman, he would never have eaten the fruit and fallen from grace. This is a very constant theme throughout early Christianity. Woman is the root of all evil, sort of sayings. That's not actually in the Bible, but it was a very common saying at the time. You also got to read into 1 Corinthians 14, where Paul is very important in the Bible, because he is the one You have the gospel, which was the ministry of Jesus, and then you have Paul, who actually wrote what became the doctrine of the church in itself. So Paul in 1 Corinthians 14, he says that women should remain silent in the church, and that if she had a question, she needs to go and ask her husband about it. You know, a lot of apologists, Christian apologists, they have a problem with this verse because there are a lot of female preachers nowadays, and we come to a point now where we're not talking about that. That's not what we're talking about. What I'm trying to say here is how the early Christians in pre-Islam viewed this verse, and they viewed this verse very, very literally. As a matter of fact, you know, if you look at the Orthodox churches and the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholics in particular, you'll notice that the priesthood is dominated by men. And as it was explained to me by a Catholic priest, the late Father Bramsfield, from the parish of the Holy Eucharist in North Bay, that because none of the apostles were women, the 12 apostles were all men. In essence, what Jesus was demonstrating there was that he desired men to be the ones to go out and form the new church. But women are prominent in the Bible. That's why this verse, as a Christian, I had a problem with it myself. But that's how early Christians sort of defined this verse, and the fact that they had to have a conference to decide if women had souls or not sort of puts that all into perspective. In I believe it's in Deuteronomy or perhaps Leviticus, that says that if women were to touch anything around them while they had their menses, that would become unclean. And if women were to walk the streets, they had to actually physically shout out, unclean, unclean, so that other people wouldn't accidentally touch them and become unclean until the evening, and have to go through all this ritual cleansing and then a certain waiting period before they could pray again. I find this really degrading because no sister wants the brothers to know that she has her menses, and but it is what it is, and that's the way that things were. Women were not allowed to inherit. Women didn't own property. You go back even to the Talmud, and the Talmud has a very interesting verse in it, which says, the crumbs of bread in the house belong to the man, right? And if a woman was to invite a guest into the house and feed her guest these crumbs, she is stealing from her husband. The woman, personally, I couldn't understand this verse even before I was a Muslim. It was because if your wife cannot give breadcrumbs to her guests, what does she have in your house? What purpose do you serve? So, that's the sort of attitude, and you'll find this very consistently throughout the Talmud. Is they don't even own the shirts on their back if they can't own breadcrumbs, and the man owns everything within the household. Onto the terms of inheritance. Now, women could not inherit. A woman could only inherit if she had no brothers, right? But if she did have brothers, the brothers would inherit everything, and then they are forbidden from sharing that inheritance with their sister, even after the fact that it becomes their property. Women were often part of the inheritance. That you take the sheep, you take the camel, you take the house, you take the wife. Women were traded as commodities. They were bought and sold to sort of strengthen tribal bonds. They were not allowed to choose their own husbands. They were not allowed to do a great many things that women do take for granted now. But this was the state of the dunya pre-Islam. there's a practice in India and some Buddhist Asian countries where the wife has to die when the husband dies, right? Burning in India, burning alive, burial in India, in China, burial alive in China. So in essence, these women didn't have high status. If your husband did die and you didn't get burnt with him, and you'll see this even in modern day India, that the widows have to go and live in communities where they're ostracized, sometimes not even receiving money. It's bad luck to marry a widow. Um, and some of these women, because they have a lot of child marriages in India, and mortality rates being what they are, some of these women are as young as 20, 21, and they're going to spend their whole lives in these little communities where you can't even eat from the hand of a widow, and it just doesn't make sense to me. But this is a society that Islam enters into. Uh, Even in Fiji, in the pre-Christian times, we had wife strangulation, where if the husband died, sickness, accident, warfare, whatever reason that there was, they loop two ropes around the lady's neck and hold it from either side, and she put baskets in front of her with like food and clothing, fishing, and things that you need for day-to-day life, and she'd say her goodbyes. It was quite a grand affair. And then once she had said her goodbyes, um, they'd yank on the ropes in two different directions and basically break her neck. Um, the reason that they did this was to so that she could go and look after her husband in the afterlife. That's what all the baskets were for. And you can ask an Itoke brother or Itoke sister about this to be able to clarify this a bit better. But I read this when I was like in Form 2, so Alhamdulillah, I still remember some of it. Um, Also in India, there was a practice, like there's a lot of Hindu schools of thought, right? But there's one particular school of thought where women are locked in barns when they have their menses. Um, so, so as not to make anything inside the house or the people around them impure. The reason that this was brought to light, and not a lot of people know about it, I think it was in May 2013, and there was a huge protest against this practice that happens in India, um, because 24 women on average per year die from this practice. And the reason that they die is exposure and disease, because as you know, menses is different for everybody. Some people have it for 2 days, some people have it for 4 days, some people have it for a week, 2 weeks, some ladies have it for months on end. So you'd have these ladies locked up in the cold, in the heat. People wouldn't go and visit them. They didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough water, and essentially it would be something that killed them, death by menses. I know in a place where there's like over a billion people, 24 per year is not a big number, but doesn't every single life matter? I hope you think so. I think so. So we had all of these things, and this was the status of women, and in some places, this status still stands. Um, Pre-Islam, in Jewish custom, women could not defend themselves legally. They had no right to speak on any legal matter. And now, if something did happen, and their honor was in question, because at that stage adultery became like a legal matter. You had to go to court for it. The husband could accuse her of adultery without evidence, and the testimony of the woman would not apply. She could not even go into the court and defend herself. Um, so her brother or her father would have to take up this this duty, and if it wasn't done properly, and the courts did not accept it, and she was found guilty, she'd go out and get stoned to death. You know, the reason I don't think this is fair, because if anybody can tell the story best, it's the one that's being accused of, right? So, uh, we have all of these things coming into play. We also have issues like divorce. Divorce is not permitted in many cultures. I believe in Hinduism, you see it now that divorce is religiously not permitted. I think it was in the 1920s that the Parliament of India came up with a divorce decree. But before that, divorce was absolutely unheard of, and you see now a lot of our Hindu sisters would not divorce their husbands because of the stigma that the society and culture puts upon these things. In Christianity, you are permitted to divorce as a woman. You are permitted to divorce, but only on the grounds of adultery. So if your husband beats you because you didn't put enough salt in the food, or he comes home every night and just acts the fool, you cannot divorce him if he does not cheat on you. You know, and in the case that he does cheat on you, and you do get divorced, you cannot remarry, because anybody that marries a divorcee is guilty of adultery. This is in the Bible. It is words by Jesus in the canonical Gospels. So these are the issues. Like I said, you have a lot of apologists who come in and talk about this, but this is not an issue for the modern day. What I'm talking about, how this was applied in pre-Islamic times. We also had the Hindu culture and the pre-Islamic Arabian culture that practiced infanticide. The Hindus, I believe, somebody correct me if I'm wrong here, daughters were undesirable because it cost too much money to get them married, and the shadi is a huge part of the Indian culture. Anybody been to an Indian wedding will tell you this. For the pre-Islamic Arabs, it was a matter of pride and dignity, that a girl child was not a blessing, but instead it was a liability, because it was the male children that worked the fields, herded the sheep, fought in the battles, brought honor um, to the tribe and the family. And basically your tribe was built upon how many warriors you had. You got to understand, it was a very feudal system. So the more male children that you had to feed them. So the less female children you had, you could give more food to your sons, and then your sons in turn would drive these things forward, and then your tribe would become stronger. For Hindus as well, I think that the sons, because the sons bring in a daughter, bring in a daughter that will become subservient to the rest of the family, especially the mother-in-law and father-in-law. There's so many customs that are built around it. I was told recently that a daughter can't touch her father's feet, but will touch the father-in-law's feet, as a matter of respect and seeking blessings. I don't know how true this is, but it's an interesting conversation I had just a few weeks ago. I haven't looked into it. Correct me again if I'm wrong on this, but these are the sort of attitudes that were given to women by men of society. And when you speak with a Western feminist, right? This Western feminist has a huge problem with what they call the patriarchal privilege, right? And the patriarchy. And these are the things that they're talking about, because this happened for the longest time in the West. Women were second-class citizens for the longest time in the West, until women's suffrage. When women's suffrage occurred and then the women's rights movement exploded, then women started to gain rights, like the right to vote, the right to ownership, the right to inherit. These things came in much later. And if you look back, in early Islam, and right up until women's suffrage, nobody ever spoke about women in Islam being oppressed, because it just wasn't true. But we will deal with all of these things, inshallah. The next video, that we're going to bring is going to speak about the rights of the daughter. All children enjoy rights in Islam, but because this is geared towards women, I'd like to take it in sequence of the rights that you have from birth to death, and inshallah to Jannah. So I hope that you have some idea of uh, what Islam came into, and our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he came in and he revolutionized, and I don't use that term lightly. He did revolutionize. He was a reformist for women's rights. Many books, many writings say this. What becomes really sad is that the people that need the most education about the rights of women in Islam are the Muslims themselves, because they get tied up with culture, and because for generations they've done things a particular way, which isn't necessarily right Islamically. They believe that it's somehow justified because their forefathers did it. But gotta understand that in Islam, where culture doesn't, it's not a problem until culture collides with what Islam says. Once it collides with what Islam says, your taqwa should tell you that the culture gets dropped, Islam gets held on to. But we see people, instead of doing this, are trying to justify their actions, like the subservience of wives to their husbands' families. This is not an Islamic thing. We will discuss this later as we discuss the rights of women, rights of wives in Islam. But inshallah, you have a better idea of what the general feeling about women was as Islam enters, and then we speak about the reformations that have taken place, and the rights that Muslim women still enjoy today. Please, do not look at the Muslims and think that what they're doing is Islamic. You got to look at Islam and see what Islam actually says about the matter. Inshallah, you'll share this video onto your wall so that we can spread the message to the Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And inshallah, we all learn a little something about the rights of women in Islam, especially to the sisters. Let your other sisters know that this video series is going on. I'd like to leave you with a thought. You know, in Clarion.org, and Clarion.org is an anti-Islamic website, they say that 75% of the reverts in the world, 75% of people coming into Islam from other faiths are women. So if Islam oppresses women, why are these women joining Islam? Think about that. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.